For God's sake.
Okay, that was an interesting struggle. So here we are on 7/18. We just had beautiful San Diego Pride Festival in Balboa Park. I was a part of that. My response to that is to create VirtueCast number 5, which is my account of what it means to be out there billboarding for approach to boy love, which doesn't go to the extremes. And we'll talk about that in several ways in the course of this podcast. I have no at-risk tech-savvy youth to help me. I'm working in my little basement here, so hopefully everything will go correctly. As you can see, I'm joined by my lovely guest here, Mop Exelancic, who will be having a debate with me later on. But before we get into all the exciting debate, let me just give a quick rundown on the 8 points I'm going to try to hit in the next 2 hours, roughly 5 to 7 here on Tuesday night. Here I am, Mark Miner, the voice of Polyphonous Unreason, hosting Manic Versations with a cast of thousands. Here in mid-July 2023, there are 8 topics I feel inspired to dump on, so please join me for this simultaneous shit. Number 1, 7/14 Friday night, I had a spat with Exelancic, who is a commenter on YouTube, who makes body horror videos about the horrors of genital discombobulation and so being sewn up together. Mostly I agree with her, but our relationship took a bit of a bad turn, so we'll discuss that in great painful detail. Number 2, Saturday I was out billboarding at the San Diego Pride. I have the billboard here. I can share that with you and tell some stories of what it felt like, what the billboard looked like, and how it went. Number 3, in response to Exelancic's comments, I decided I wanted to have a debate with a better version of Exelancic, so I created my own better Exelancic out of a mop and a cartoon. So we'll be having a debate with Exelancic. The title of that debate, which I think will be an interesting one, will be this: do we need more trans interiority or less trans interiority? As a poet, I deal with the muse, which is the fountainhead of all poetic sensibilities, all poetic interiority. And so I think the kids out there who are struggling with gender issues need more guidance in how to work with their gender interiority. Exelancic, in many of her videos, has taken the opposite point of view, that trans interiority does not exist. There is no ghost in the machine. And if young women are listening to their Joan of Arc voices and based on that are deciding that they have to become a man and are getting surgeries based on those voices, the less they listen to those voices, the better. I hope that's a fair representation of Exelancic views, which I will debate her on in the course of this podcast. Number 4, puerility and senility. 7 ages of boy love activism. This is a celebration, a little Shakespeare parody celebrating the poster known on Boy Chat as Lyle, or Lila May, as I refer to him now, and Tom O'Carroll, who's an older fellow who's been very active with the blog Heretic TOC, Heretic Talk, Heretic Tom O'Carroll. So we'll have recite a little poetry in honor of them, of Lila May being a young activist, and of Tom Carroll being an old activist, and me taking up arms to go out there to Balboa Park. That's kind of a moment. Number 5, I'm very active on Urban Dictionary, coming up with new terms, which I think are helpful because we're moving into a time where the old vocabulary is no longer adequate. I think it's a very important poetic job to make up new words for what we're going through. Pedotoileting is an incredibly important concept that any activist is going to have to deal with. I want to be talking about the norms of male role model formation and how people get off track to one side with neglect or get off track to the other side with abuse of boys. Both of those are obviously bad. We want to get people back on the main track of normal male role modeling. Unfortunately, there's also a conversation happening over here, which I call pedotoiling, which is where people have bad feelings inside themselves. They want to express those feelings, and they look for a warm place to dump them on. And so when I'm out there with a billboard, I have to deal with people dumping their bad feelings on me. So I made up a word for that. Another word I watch with amazement and a certain amount of horror as trans men now are being more and more open about taking babies and putting the babies to their male chest and letting the babies suck on their male nipples with whatever lactation simulation might have been induced by the lactation-inducing drugs. As a classical scholar, I have access to Catullus, and the word irrumo generates irrumatophilia, which we'll talk about that, the fetish that trans men are talking about more and more now of putting a baby to the breast, even though they're actually a man. Number 6, there was a recent interview that Jen Speck did with James Cantor. I think that's worthy of further comment. Dr. Cantor talked about Include the P a few years ago. No one really took him up on that. Sasha and Stella of Jen Speck did take him up on that. I think that's very appropriate, very interesting debate. Much pedotoileting happens in that debate where Cantor will put across a view and Sasha and Stella don't necessarily agree with it, and they'll bring some emotion, and then Cantor with his Vulcan persona will want to talk more about the science and less about the feelings that the results of the science engender in the bosoms of Sasha and Stella. And so he jumps in with kind of an routine. And there's much comment about that because some people commenting on this in YouTube feel that was rude or that the perspective of Stella and Sasha was not being properly listened to. Whereas, of course, Cantor is going to focus on the science. So I think Jen Speck number 120 is worth some discussion. Another interview which I saw, which is very interesting and much worthy of discussion, is Boyce of Reason. Mr. Benjamin Boyce did a second interview with Phil Illey. Phil Illey is a juggler who has come out with a book talking about his perspective on autogynephilia. He calls it autoheterosexuality or something to that effect. Phil Illey, being a juggler, has the free use of his hands much more so than I do. I haven't got that much dexterity. But what I observed with the Phil Illey interview is that as Boyce would cue him for the one or cue him for the other, the male personality or the female personality, and Phil Illey certainly has both, you would get a certain, alternate gesture that he would make, which was kind of a tell as to what mode, what side of his brain he was on. And that was something I was able to document through the course of the fairly long interview. So that I found that absolutely fascinating, and I would like to, especially with regard to the topic of trans interiority, what I call Zaphod Beeble trans, of having one head on your shoulder and then another head on your shoulder, so that you can have this conversation and not feel obliged to be locked into one gender or the other. So that's number 7. The big final one is that after many years of work, I am now done with Plato's Phaedrus in terms of putting it together as a 4-language text. So I've got the Greek, Ficino's Latin, English, pretty much mine, and in the bottom right corner we have the Japanese of Fujisawa Norio, came out in 1967, and this makes it possible to bring the Phaedrus into the discussions that the Japanese are having about boy love right now in 2023. If you've been following the Japanese cultural scene, Johnny, that is to say Johnny Kitagawa, the famous impresario of male talent, having died a few years ago, now more and more of the Johnny's boys are coming out and talking about how they were abused by Johnny, and it's becoming kind of a stink. There's a documentary release. There's a lot of effort to get that discussion to happen, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of effort to squelch that discussion, because a boy whose career is made in this way by a powerful older man is going to expect to have ongaeshi it's a little disorienting when I shift gears into Japanese, is going to expect to return the favor by maintaining the older man's reputation and not telling tales about whatever it was that Johnny did to them at night. But the sad reality is that Johnny did a lot of stuff to those boys at night. And so that's a discussion now. You have the contrast between wanting to be true, wanting to find your own emotionality. But the fact is, a lot of those kids were able to climb up the ladder of success and fame in Japan's entertainment world because Johnny gave them a leg up. So I'm hoping to bring the Phaedrus into that cultural discussion. We'll see if that bears any fruit. All right, so those are the 8 points I'm going to try to cover in the course of Virtue Cast number 5. I'm scrolling my screen here. Oh, just to show a little skin to get the ball rolling here. In the course of many years of a 12-hour philological day, sitting here at my desk and typing up Japanese, Greek, Latin, and English, and pulling everything together to make a beautiful text, I do acquire two very marked symptoms of the kind of stress and strain my body is put under. So one of them I call flat, scabby, philological ass, which I will not show you. But I was out Thursday working in the sun with a different shirt than I usually wear, moving concrete blocks and moving 6 cubic yards of soil materials for the nursery where I work. And I developed a really remarkable thing that I call a Neapolitan tan, which I'll forbear to show you in any detail except that from here it's chocolate, from here it's strawberry, from here it's vanilla. So that's a joyful demonstration of my relationship to San Diego viticulture, San Diego agriculture, San Diego sun, and the fact that it's a beautiful, beautiful July here in San Diego. So consider yourself exposed to some genuine skin here, which is about as dark as my face. Okay, getting busy now with number one. Let's do a quick recap of what the first couple of virtue casts amounted to, which is not a lot. Number 1 and 2, I was just getting my feet wet with the technology. I brought on a guest, Todd Nickerson, who had spoken to Salon about being an out girl lover. I invited him to be on the first 2 podcasts. He said yes. Kind of a stretch for me just to do it at all. Kind of a stretch for me to reach out to Todd all the way across the country in Tennessee. Kind of a stretch to reach out for me as a male-identified boy lover to talk to Todd. And he's a girl lover, and he's got the sensibilities and the way of speaking and thinking that belong to a girl lover. So he's a different animal, different kind of animal than I am. But the one really good thing I would want to preserve from those first 2 virtue casts is Todd and I reciting Pygmalion together. I have to recite Pygmalion because it's one of the well-known Ovid tales. Daphne and Apollo, Pyramus and Thisbe, you know them all. The boy that flies, Icarus, Daedalus and Icarus, and of course, Pygmalion, and as we later find out, Galatea, the statue that comes to life. Not one of my favorite tales because, hey, there's no boys in it. But when I recite that poem, me doing the Latin, Todd Nickerson reciting the English, I see it through Todd's eyes as a girl lover. And Pygmalion is sculpting the female form, and he's putting flowers on it, he's putting dress on it, he's putting a jewelry on it, he's making it lay down on a couch. How comfortable would that be, given that it's a stone statue? So that was really fun. That was really fun to get Todd's perspective on Ovid's Pygmalion, to work with him as a girl lover and me as a boy lover. And this is one of my big points. I think it's extremely important that when boy lovers come to speak publicly, they do so not about the dirty stuff, but rather this is us as being civilized. This is us presenting poetry. Wouldn't the world be nicer if all boy lovers and girl lovers could express their feelings in poetry rather than sexual misconduct? Okay, virtue cast number 3. I was a little bit concerned to see the response of the University of North Texas to Mr. Jeff Younger, whose son, James Younger, is caught up in a battle where the divorced ex-wife situation. Dr. Ann Georgoulas, the pediatrician, has taken the kid, at the crack of 2023. She took him to California, and Mr. Younger, back in, I believe it was March 2022, had spoken at the University of North Texas next to his house about the situation. And he had been viciously chanted at and harassed by the protesters that were there that night. So I made a comment on that. I compared the chanting of the protesters in North Texas in March 2022 to Cybele Inactus, which of course is my favorite poem because it gives such a great expression of trans ecstasy and trans regret. And because the cultists, they're wild-eyed cultists, they get into the chanting, they get into the Mother Goddess cult, and they get into the castration. That can't happen now, can it? Well, I wanted to show, look at what's happening here. You be the judge. Is that what's happening here? Is this a bona fide castration cult happening here? So that was virtue cast number 3. Virtue cast number 4, I saw another fellow making pedocentric content. This is a girl lover. This is Mr. Girl is his name. And he's had a very interesting way of involving his listeners in his pedo content, getting guests to admit their pedo interests and then blaming them for their pedo interests once he had gotten them to talk about that. So I did a listen talking about Mr. Girl and his followers and what exactly is the dynamic there. Is anyone getting any healthier from listening to Mr. Girl's content? Now, I mentioned the fact that Mr. Girl has his horses. That's what he calls his followers, the people that watch him on his podcast. That brings up the interesting question: what do we call the people that listen to Benjamin Boyce and Boyce of Reason? Boyce and his boars. I'm just saying because BOR is Boyce of Reason. And likewise, what do we call the people who listen to Exolansic's context? Exolansic's. Just a thought. Take it and run with it, internet, if it's something you like. The point of these virtue casts is not that they be good. I'm pretty sure they won't be any good. My Meche is full-voiced epic. Arma virumque cano Troiae qui primus abor. That kind of crap. That's what I'm naturally good at. That's what I've done for my whole career. And I'm operating at a level of emotion and vocalization that is appropriate for a several thousand people, for an amphitheater with a several thousand people in it. That's very different than being cooped up in a studio and yakking at a screen with a little microphone and a mop that smells like Fantabulosa, a cleaning solution. So appearing as a guest, as an epic poet, appearing as a representative of epic poetry as a guest on someone else's podcast is like asking me to pee in a shot glass. I mean, I can do it, but it's probably going to be messy because of the large amount of voice and personality and emotion that are natural to me as a poet. And of course, the other thing I do is philology, and that's me sitting there going like this for 12 hours, and that's pure engagement death. No one's going to be interested in me talking about philology. So what I've done is try to bring some more playful puppet show type stuff into the discussion, and I'm hoping that will prove fruitful. So this little adventure in pedocasting is meant to showcase the ontological shift. It's not meant to be good or entertaining in any sense. It's meant to showcase the ontological shift from non-being of boy lover lack of representation, that is, boy lovers considered by parents, law enforcement, teachers, and therapists as inhuman predator animals to be studied, from that to boy lover generated content, that is, content made by lovers for boy lovers, and in which boy lovers can see themselves and their concerns and be inspired. This is how boy lovers become people instead of just uncontrolled impulses. We had Rookie, we had Sure Quality Radio, we had Pedalogs, we had Candace Christiansen's Prevention podcast. That was a laugh a minute. Now we have Virtue Cast number 5, whoop-de-doo, and by we'll have something better than that. And I definitely have my eye on the younger activists, that the tech-savvy at-risk youth, that they should be able to crank out something better and more interesting than what I'm able to do here. So the lifeblood of Twitter, the computer is a very female place. It's all about talking and relating and getting in fights and generating engagement and throwing pepper in people's face, and other people throw pepper back at your face. And it's all kind of tedious for a person like me who has a math and classics background. I want to be talking about ideas. But if this is the nature of the internet, I have to participate in it as it is in order to get any attention. And sure enough, The Gentle Art of Making Enemies, Oscar Wilde and James Whistler, I have had a spat on Twitter with a powerful and prolific Spatrix named Exelancic. Now, as we get into the play of persona, I don't want to leave anybody behind. Everyone at BoyChat knows me and understands me to be a polyphonous person. Sometimes I will speak very high, and sometimes I will speak very popular. Sometimes I'll speak very San Diego. Sometimes I'll speak like a British person because I grew up in London. Sometimes I'll speak like a Japanese person. Sometimes I'll speak like a high boy lover priest. Sometimes I'll speak, just as down and dirty as anybody else at BoyChat. Oh, I like to see young cock twitch. I like to lay pipe on a cutie. That's the kind of crap that you sometimes get at BoyChat, even now. Because I am polyphonous, I can operate just by power of my voice with different images and different characters. Other people are not quite as skilled at that. They couldn't go from a goddess to a Batrako Miyomaki to playing a mouse or a frog. They couldn't go back and forth between those things with the same speed that I would do as a professional poet and reciter of poetry. So there is a person who lives at home named Sierra, and she appears on the internet in various manifestations. So I have my little placard made up, and this, if I can get the glare off of it, this is how Sierra presents on her social media, which is a very nice, dolled up, charming image. Standing next to me is Exelancic with a caricature of Exelancic that was done by somebody else who, again, getting into spat with Exelancic over this whole thing. It just went on and on and on. It was very boring. Attached to a mop. This is a standard representation of, how do I want to put this? It is the simplest and crudest way I could think of introducing the Zaphod Bibeltrans concept, which a lot of people were just not getting, maybe because the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is no longer current. But if you think back to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there was a character named Zaphod Beeblebrox who had two heads. And I adapted this image in my cartoonish way to be Zaphod Bibeltrans, which is where you process the trans interiority by imagining yourself to have a male head and a female head and trying to get the male head and the female head to talk to each other. So doing the Exolansic caricature as a mop is a way of bringing this part of Exolansic's personality into the discussion and the debate. This is not the real Sierra. It has nothing to do with her. She's back home in Berkeley doing what she does. She has a real life, I'm sure. But what had happened was that Exolansic was continuing to fuss about this caricature having been made of her. As you can see, the caricature looks far better than I do, comes across very well in the medium that we're operating in now, which is a very simple pixelated medium of me looking into the camera, precisely because it is so simple. Exolansic, as is a woman's privilege, was objecting to the skin tone, was objecting to the nose, objecting to the eyes and the teeth, objecting to the fact that she was made to look like she was riding on a tricycle. And she fired back against that enthusiastically and has continued to wheeze about it. I couldn't see that this was the world's worst caricature. It looks like something you'd spend $5 on at a county fair and laugh at and you go on with your life. But whatever. So, in responding to Exolansic continuing to fuss over this caricature of herself, I showed a picture of Spencer Klavan. Spencer Klavan had showed a picture of himself working out. He's the son of Andrew Klavan, studied classics at Oxford, very handsome fellow and very worked out. And he has a thing about otters. I don't know what his deal is with otters, but he's been making a whole thing about otters for the last week. I think it's hilarious. So I took the picture of Spencer Klavan having worked out and using my cartoonist skills, and don't hate on me. The first thing I ever really wanted to be as a cartoonist, I have no talent to draw, no talent to make up new stories. So that's where I failed in life as a 10-year-old boy. As I went to the Comic-Con, I had no ability to draw. But anyway, I took the Spencer Klavan image of him having worked out, being all buff, and I drew brown fur on it, and I drew a little black nose on it like an otter has, and I drew little whiskers on it to represent otter whiskers, which I thought it was cute. So I threw it up there on Exolansic's thread, and I said, hey, Exolansic, here's a picture of Spencer Klavan. Here's a little cartoon I did of it. Innocent laughs. Maybe Spencer Klavan doesn't actually have a black nose. He doesn't actually have whiskers. He doesn't actually have brown fur. But, for the point of making the joke that he has a thing about otters, I thought it worked pretty well as a stupid little cartoon. And maybe you could start thinking in terms of cartoons as stupid little things that they are. Because like I say, I'm a cartoon guy at heart. I'm very comic book oriented. I loved comics as a kid. I still do. And so it hurts me to see people profoundly upset, as Exolansic has seemed to be, over just a cartoon. So there I was Friday night getting ready to do a billboarding thing on Saturday. And I put these little cartoons up, and Exolansic starts responding to me with death threats. A series of death threats. Couldn't quite follow that. We exchanged a few remarks earlier. I had complimented her on her excellent work with the body horror videos and the medical reality of how bad it is when they start to cut up kids' bodies. I think she's entirely on track with that, and I'd love to see her continue to make more content in that vein. What we disagreed about, and this is where things get interesting, is that I'm big on trans interiority because I'm the guy who gives voice to the muse, right? That's a goddess figure in classical tradition. At the same time, I do the Batrachomyomachia, which is where I give voice to all the little animals, right? And I do umpteen different stories, and I have to play umpteen different characters, and that's the kind of loosey-goosey personality that I have. So as I had noted here, you wouldn't catch Spencer Klavan having a meltdown over me making a cartoon of him as an otter with brown fur and a black nose. Okay, he doesn't actually look like that, but no one is going to be in the least bit disrupted by the fact that I've done a silly cartoon of him. But as I say, Exolansic started in on me with a series of death threats. I assumed she was being playful. I assumed that this was with reference to our previous conversations. I was trying to wonder why she was upset. I wasn't really coming up with anything because I had been very complimentary towards her, and I've been a participant in the discussions that hosted by the genial Mr. Benjamin Boyce. I've been a participant in the discussions that Exolansic and her crew of mutant X-women had been holding. And then it finally hit me because I went back to review the threads to try to get a feel for where she was coming from. I noticed that she had said, not directly in the thread, but not directly in the thread where I was commenting, but in another thread, to her followers, Google Mark Miner pedo and then come and get on my Discord. And I said, well, when I look up my name, I typically see a long list of poetic shows that I've done all over the country because that's been my career now that I'm 57. I can look back on that, and many of those shows are still, you can see the references to them when you Google my name, Mark Robert Miner. But what Exelancic did was she put Google Mark Miner, and if you Google Mark Miner, this other character comes up, and this is where things get juicy and interesting. Apparently, there is this other character named Mark Joseph Miner, who is about my age, 50s, lives in Northern California. I live in Southern California. And this Mark Joseph Miner has a long string of pedophile sex offenses. So I thought, oh, this must be it. This must be what's causing her to think of me as an evil sex offender and address me as if I was an evil sex offender instead of someone on the same team who's trying to get people to think twice before sending their kids off to gender surgery. Because Exelancic was referring to his, are you Mark Miner, the famous pedo? I'm like, yeah, Mark Miner, the famous pedo. I thought nothing of it. Well, finally someone recognized me. That's very nice. Because I've been doing poetry all over the country for the last 20 years. But it seems that she was conflating the two in her mind. That's if she has another explanation, then I'd be glad to hear it. But as I say, haven't heard it at this point. So I saw this taking place on Friday night, 7/14, and this was the night before I was going to go out and do billboarding in Balboa Park with my little signboard in imitation of Stanley Green, the passion protein man of London, who was very much a presence in Oxford Street when I was growing up in London, right next to Oxford Street in 80, 81, 82. I make no comments about any other people who might be out there with billboards. They speak for themselves. I speak for myself. There's no connection there. But anyway, I thought it would be cool to be out there at Pride and doing a monochromatic shame routine in the midst of the rainbow Pride routine. I thought it'd be offer a little change, a little variety. So we'll get to the billboard in due time. The point is, I was a little primed, a little aggressive as far as, if I need to defend my reputation, I will defend my reputation, given that I was going to be out there in public the day after. So after some attempt to engage Exelancic in a back and forth, I said, what's going on here? What's the deal? Are you deliberately trying to get people to conflate me, Mark Robert Miner, with, this other Mark Joseph Miner character, simply because pedo is pedo? It's like an Aesop's fable. If it was not you, it was your father, and that is all one. Any excuse will serve a tyrant. So, went back and forth, and again, she had been very aggressive towards me, and then she was doing this thing about conflating me with Mark Joseph Miner. So I lost my temper, and I was a little bit intemperate, because I'm a Welsh poet, and this happens sometimes. So I called her a vicious gossip, a sloppy researcher, a disgrace to Berkeley, and a rallier of harpies. So I've emptied my pocket of all my vicious, misogynistic classical epithets there. And that was going some, I admit it. It would have been far better if I could have had a proper conversation and try to get a sense of where people are coming from rather than resorting to intemperate language, but there it is. So I called her all those names and I said, well, how about if you go ahead and, number one, clarify and apologize and affirm that Mark Robert Miner and Mark Joseph Miner are not the same person? You got one guy who is doing his best to lay out positive content for my fellow boy lovers to try to get them back on track, rather than being sex maniacs. And you got another guy who has been arrested for actual sex crimes. Do you understand how important it is that I don't allow those two images to be conflated? Anyway, I got no response from Exelancic. Later on, around 11:30 that night, I went back and I looked, and she had deleted everything. In a good Encyclopedia Dramatica fashion, she had deleted everything, and I haven't heard from her since. Maybe I never will. Who knows? So, feeling bad about it, I appealed to Benjamin Boyce, who is a conversating person who understands that sometimes kids get in little fights on the school bus, and you need to make peace between them. And I said, I'm sorry, I was intemperate with Exelansic. I think we're by and large on the same team. She sounds like a very intelligent, very witty person, exactly the kind of person that I would like to be friends with and make content with, if that were possible. So if there's anything you can do, Benjamin, maybe you could make peace between us. I'm hoping. We'll see. Well, what else did I go off? And I got a few other choice tweets, which I saved. Someone draws a fairly innocent cartoon of her, something anyone might get at a county fair, and she goes off like it's the end of the world. She directs her followers to tar me as a convicted pedophile sex offender. Not a word of apology or clarification. That was what I wrote before I let loose with the traditional epithets. So 11:34 p.m., I went back and checked, and she had deleted everything. And then I appealed to Benjamin Boyce. So I'll read some of the tweets are in a fairly coherent stream when I write to Boyce. Twitter fosters a tree structure to where you can get vertical development and horizontal development of every node. Second tweet referring to the first, third to the second, fourth to the third, or second tweet referring to the first, third to the first, fourth to the first, fifth to the first. So you can get a horizontal development, and then every node can develop similarly. So it's not writing. It's a good idea generation system, but it's not writing. You have to go back and put the writing into order later. But when I was writing to Benjamin, I was less upset, and so I wrote something that was a little more coherent, which I will now read. Okay. Hi, Benjamin. I got in a spat with Exelansic 2 nights ago, and I feel bad about it. She was directing her followers to Google Mark Minor pedo and then go to her Discord and snigger about it. I was mildly peeved, as I'd collected all relevant links under my Facebook page. There was a whole other thing which I don't even want to get into, where a furry journalist had made an assault article on me after I had gone to Vancouver and recited Apuleius' Golden Ass, which shows a man turning into a donkey and then turning back again, which I think is a good lesson for furries. The man did not engage with Apuleius at all. He just is a guy called Patchy Fur in the furry community. He just did an attack article, Mark Minor's an evil pedo, and I was just like, I don't have the time to respond to furries. I really don't. So I was mildly peeved as I collected all the relevant links under my Facebook page. And indeed, I had put in a link to the furry article on me because I thought it was hilarious. I mean, furries can't read. They have those big fake paws on. They can't read. They can't do classical scholarship. Turns out, continues my thread to Mr. Boyce, turns out there's a guy about my age in Northern California who has done time for pedo offenses named Mark Joseph Minor. I am Mark Robert Minor. So I called out Exelansic for being deliberately misleading, reported her to Twitter, and asked for an apology. She deleted everything and blocked me. I was intemperate, called her a villainous gossip, a sloppy researcher, and a disgrace to UC Berkeley. Careful medical research is her brand. Muddling me with a sex offender is not careful research. Anyways, I'm out at San Diego Pride this weekend, inspired by other great gender warriors. With a sign saying kids cannot consent to pedophilia, and on the other side, LGBTQ, capital Greek pi, lowercase Greek pi, with the whole thing crossed out, sur rature. We'll discuss that in a moment. In any case, for the record, I have no criminal record on anything, much less for sex offenses, and am entirely focused on deploying traditional Greek and Latin stories to help guys with BL interests find better ways to express themselves, that is, better than sex. If you're thinking of me as a person with a criminal record due to sloppy internet research, then you've been misled. Just wanted to set the record straight. Now, I come from a Christian background, so I had to go off. I'm not good enough to set up with a triumphalist Christian post-gay rhetoric, Jesus set me free, pedo no more. But I am good enough to express my boy love interests in stories about boy love, and I focus on stories about boy love that end with the protagonists, Pelops, Telemachus, Apollo, as heterosexuals. And what more can you or society want? I can see that from now on, I'm going to have to begin every billboarding conversation by disambiguating myself from this Mark Joseph Minor character, who really is a sex offender, which is a drag and a waste of time. So, thanks for muddying the waters, Sierra. As the person who just got the term pedotoileting put up on Urban Dictionary at the end of May, I am hardly going to let Exelancic do her pedotoileting on me and not call her out. Reference to Urban Dictionary, pedotoileting. Generally speaking, I'm very fond of X's content. She's smart, witty, fun, and on the right track. I have been kidding her for being exclusively focused on body horror, at the expense of the spiritual dynamics involved. The Joan of Arc voices in girls, the be like mother voices in boys, the internal psychodynamics, the ghost in the machine. That's all my line of work as a poet. I went through high school in 3 years instead of 4. I didn't take a class in biology. I know nothing about biology. I would not open my mouth on the subject of medical research. Exelancic covers that extremely well. On the other hand, we poets have our noises to make as well. We are on the same side in a fight where we need all the allies we can get. If we can get beyond the immediate spat and the emotions pertaining thereto, X is a person I would like to get to know better and be friends with. Friday night was the eve of me going out and billboarding as a Scarlet P for the first time, and I was a bit wound up, touchy, and concerned with my reputation and how people would respond to me. Thus, I was primed to be verbally aggressive when attacked, and probably kind of overdid it in attacking X back. Anyways, if you could play the office of peacemaker between us, that would be a good Christian thing to do and much appreciated. She's taken down the material that was offending me, and I'm prepared to apologize for being extra crabby Friday night. And then I put Mark Robert Minor because that's the whole point of the thing, is that I'm Mark Robert Minor, which is my father's name. I'm not Mark Joseph Minor. That's a different guy. Now, as I was typing the thread to Benjamin Boyce, I got an idea for a debate, and I began to try to pull it together because I want to be producing interesting content that is interesting because two sides of an interesting debate are given full representation. Putting the matter in sharpest focus, Exelancic firmly abjures, swears off, any discourse about the gender ghost in the machine. No souls in boys, no spirits in girls. Only meat, only materialism. She said this several times on several podcasts. I don't think that's a misrepresentation of her position. Me, I take it for granted that there is a gender ghost in the machine. I focus on stories that give form to the spirit voices in girls and the soul voices in boys. Because I'm a poet. Socrates in the Phaedrus, for instance, describes himself at one point as almost having a nympholeptic fit. Hard to say exactly what that means, but it clearly suggests that he feels some sort of Greek mood coming on. That clash over trans interiority is the relevant clash between me and Exelancic, and is, I think, worth a public discussion, if not a proper Boyce of Reason conversation TM. That's Benjamin Boyce's term, which he has marked out for himself and does very well with. The petty stuff, the name-calling, that I'd like to see less of. For a debate title, how about, do we need more trans interiority or less trans interiority? I say we need more, and I symbolize what that would look like with a cartoon image of Zaphod Bibeltrans. So here I am, here's the boy head, here's the girl head, Mop Exelancic, having a discussion. Exelancic says we're all just meat golems, and the less girls with trans fantasies listen to their Joan of Arc voices, the better off they'll be. I feel like Exelancic is trying to put me in a bizarre and unfair position of having to disentangle myself from the common sex offender image. I represent that image when I tell Zeus Ganymede stories or Eumolpus stories. That doesn't mean it's fair to say I am a sun stealer like Zeus. I've put in decades learning to express my male violence in traditional Greek and Latin poetry and heroic poetry, and my gender identity formation failures in traditional poetry about gender, namely Opus Generis and Plato's Phaedrus. I'm very performative with what I do, with my representations of male violence, which I perform, and male gender failure, which I also perform. And Exelancic has butlered around enough at Berkeley to know that term. In addition, you might observe a certain concern for female performativity in Exelancic's self-representation on Twitter. So this lovely image here that I'm holding up on a little placard is how Exelancic chooses to present herself in social media. Her hair has been waffle stomped. I don't know what the technical term is. There's a crimper that they use to put body and volume and zigzag curves in hair, and she's used that to great effect here. She's got the makeup on her cheeks, she's done her eyes, she's done her lips, she's got a smile, she looks happy and relaxed. She's got a very aesthetic little bit of a plant in a bit of a bottle. She's very charming. So the play of identity then is there's a real Sierra at home. This is the Exelancic she chooses to present on social media, which is very natural. This is the image of herself that she most sincerely and most vociferously rejects for herself. Though oddly enough, it seems to show up much better in on my particular camera. I don't know why that is. It's not the point I'm trying to make. It's just a point that's being made. And in the context of my work in poetry, you need to know that that's all performativity on my part. The violence, when I pretend to be as Achilles, mad enough to kill Agamemnon, that's me performing. The pedo-lust, when I pretend to be Zeus grabbing Ganymede, oh, that was good, that hand was good. When I pretend to be Zeus grabbing Ganymede, or when I do Poseidon grabbing Pelops, or when I do Eumolpus playing the wolf in the story of the Pergamene boy and grabbing the boy, that's all performative. The disclaiming of pedolust, as we get in this in great detail in Plato's Phaedrus, the disclaiming of pedolust is also performative. If I were not able to perform the disclaiming of pedolust, I would not be able to do the many speeches in the Phaedrus where that is what the character is doing. I have to play the man who expresses pedolust and the man who disclaims pedolust and the man who switches back and forth between them very rapidly. The pirouetting between the two is an act. Apollo's conversion to heterosexuality is also an act. He is always converting. He never gets there. It's not his function. He's not Baucis and Philemon. It's not his function to represent married love. It's Apollo's function to represent the young guy who plays with younger guys, as well as the later adolescent who gives up younger guys and starts pursuing Daphne. That is the performativity which is what makes Daphne and Apollo so fun. So I have to perform Apollo lusting for Kyparissos, having a great, deep relationship with Kyparissos, Apollo having a very, having a very saucy relationship with Cupid at the beginning of Daphne and Apollo, and then turning away from boy love and becoming heterosexual. I have to perform all of that. That's my job. That's what I do as a poet. So, I am not happy when someone, with a flick of her little fingers, recommends a Google search which puts me in the box of being the common chimo, and then doesn't have the decency to apologize for it. I don't want to be in the position of having to yell, Napalt, 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 all the time. And my cleverer audience members will have already figured out what I mean by Napalt. Not all pedophiles are like that. And I have to yell that when I'm faced with meaningless attacks based on something as simple-minded as a similarity of names. I digressed a little bit here, but it's still good. There are perfectly sensible evolutionary reasons for women, moms especially, to respond viscerally by panicking over pedos, like cats do to cucumbers, when they see something pedo-ish out of the corner of their eye. Nature has tasked them with the defense of their children, and many women are quite open about admitting the animal nature of their defensive responses. The mama bears and mama dragons meme is popular in some circles. Now I give a calibrated list of 4 YouTube links to make my point of why sun stealers are necessary. And this is in response to Exelancic having wittily thrown this one at me. Why be a pedo? Well, it's because that's what I am. Why be a pedo? That was Exelancic's question. I thought it deserved a fair question, deserves a fair answer. So I put together 4 links to show, in the mode of the Phaedrus, the different processes involved. That's not how I want to put it. Let me think here. I give 4 links to show the development from the instinctual level to the fully human level of this process that I'm talking about, which is the Sun Keeper process. And I put knockout. Not all cucumbers are like that. When it's cats having an exaggerated response, it's cute, because you know the cat feels silly about freaking out once it relaxes and sees that it's just a cucumber. So I gave a little link to cats and cucumbers, which is a very silly thing on the net. There is actually a LDS, a Mormon mothers group called Mama Dragons, who defend, they stick up for the rights of their gay sons, and presumably their lesbian daughters, too, I hope. This is a manifestation of that animal instinct, what they call the mama bear instinct, but they've taken it to the next level by literally calling themselves Mama Dragons. Jordan Peterson has not pronounced on this. You would think that he would, because the chaos dragon, the female nature of the chaos dragon that must be slain for the young man to become independent, that's been kind of his shtick. So when I see Mormon women selling themselves, selling their group as the Mama Dragons, that catches my eye. That's a little bit of myth there. Third link that I put in. If the mom plays the mothering game to win, successfully fighting off all challengers, be they cucumbers or pedophiles, to keep a firm grasp on her precious child, then we get the mother-bound son. And this was a link that was just making the rounds on Twitter, on which I spend way too much time, as my fellow boy chatters like to admonish me. There was this woman called Jenny Lynn and her little son that she was calling Flower and putting in a dress. Jenny Lynn and Flower. Jenny Lynn is the final Titan boss that Zeus must fight to rescue the boy Flower from his Mamasaurus. And I gave the link, and I called her Venus of Jenny Lindorf. The fourth link that I put up, and again, you have to start with the cats and cucumbers, then you get the mother dragons with the Mormons, and you get Jenny Lynn and her son, which she is transing and calling Flower. The fourth link which I put up is what that configuration looks like a few years later. A full-grown little Mr. I've never separated from mom, whose sexuality is completely patterned on his mother's Sun Keeper pattern. And this is a Protect the Innocent. I believe it's a group in Colorado. They're continuing to operate in the tradition of Javier von Erck and perverted justice by doing stings. So they did a sting on a guy, and they said, you have to show up. They told him what they were doing, but you have to show up or we'll turn you to law enforcement or whatever. They put leverage on him. So a 20-year-old guy shows up with his mother, and you can watch the whole clip, and it's just hair-raisingly bad. So there's a continuum. Boys continue to grow up to become men, even if they never escape the Mamasaurus. Women scream when men steal their sons away. There's a place for that in Greek culture. You can read about it in Pindar. And yet modern American women don't seem too pleased with continually having to mother grown-up sons who were never stolen away. Sons who want to be with them, be like them, and never leave mother. And this is where you get the turfness and the all-female spaces, and you can't even have... Anyway, I don't want to get into turfs. In that last example, the pedo holding his mother's hand for support because he was caught trying to date a 12-year-old boy. In that last example, the pedo holding his mother's hand for support during the interview, and they went for it. They said, have a seat, full on Chris Hansen style. They did it. The Sun Keeper personality of the mom has so contaminated the son that in pursuing boys to devour like his mom, he becomes that modern bogeyman, the tranny pedo son stealer and Sun Keeper. And this is what I harass my fellow boy chatters about, because I don't want to see them going down that road. In this discussion, I'm not particularly concerned with whether that 20-year-old man has any AGP behaviors or not, any cross-dressing, any dildoing and experimenting with penetration fantasies or what have you. What I am seeing and reflecting is that there is no dad in the picture. We were taught to think in terms of the salient male role, in terms of the 3-year-long post-gay groups that I went to. We were told to talk about the salient male, ordinarily the man who stands out, not the wallpaper dad, but the salient male. So the salient male, in this Christian description of gender identity formation, is the man who comes home and plays with his son for 5 minutes. and then reads the paper and goes to bed and goes to work. That's the difference you see in American middle-class Christian life between the wallpaper dad and the salient dad. Is a salient dad will grab the boy away from the mother and play catch with him in the backyard for 5 minutes. Very important difference. You won't get Zeus Ganymede in the Christian tradition. What you will get is the salient male. So in general, what I'm doing with my frantic performativity is holding up a mirror to those processes which seem pathological, but not uncommon, to try to get people back on track to more normal paths of development when they've gotten off into trans, AGP, fail male, bogged down, great father worship, oh, look, he's got such big shoulders, great mother obsession, or, like Apollo, are eternally super hot for the first teenage girl they ever noticed. And there was that judge, what's his name, Roy? Yeah, there was that judge in Alabama who was hanging out at the mall court to talk to 16-year-old girls. You don't want to go down that road either. Let Apollo do that. Apollo will always be there, and you will go on. You will go on. One mustn't be afraid of the Venus of Jenny Lindorf, even though Exolancic throws a little question like, why be a pedo? I'm telling you why I'm a pedo. Because the son stealer is an important role. You won't get that in the Christian tradition. You'll get the salient male, where the father can do a little bit of salient male work. Maybe a gym teacher or a pastor or a merit badge counselor would be able to do a little bit of a salient male thing. But Zeus Ganymede exists only in the story of Zeus Ganymede. Now, a real poet like Dante, he can bring that out, that Zeus Ganymede thing. He can bring it out and use it in Christian poetry, which is very, very charming to see. In conclusion, I think we are all called to look at these matters at a higher level than mere slander, mere personalities, and mere Twitter spats. We need to keep our facts straight when it's a question of easily verified facts. And when it's a question of kids needing a place to play through their issues, society needs to afford kids that space, neither squelching that play nor taking gender play seriously as a serious need for $250,000 gender surgery. It doesn't help to spread nonsense memes like, minor is a chimo, it even says so on the net. That's not the discourse I want to be a part of, and I'm hoping to leave it behind by making these remarks. Ad read. Ben Shapiro's True Value Hanukkah Gelt. Look, folks, times are tough and instability is growing. The Russian ruble is gone. Crypto is how you get gypto. Chinese money spies on you. And the American dollar has about had it. Why don't you think about putting some or indeed all of your money into Ben Shapiro's gold foil wrapped True Value Hanukkah Gelt? It's not worth a damn, but at least you can eat the chocolate. Available in denominations of 20, 50, and 100. Second heading. I'm going to talk a little bit about Sunday at Pride. Saturday at Pride, 7:15. I was out there billboarding. Let me grab the billboard. Okay, that was kind of sucky. I knew it was going to be kind of sucky. It was a new kid at the FedEx place. He didn't understand how to blow up the thing, so the thing came out small and it doesn't show up on the screen very well. So, moving on. One side said kids cannot consent to pedophilia. That, it seemed to me, was a very reasonable, clickbaity discussion starter. Come up to me, tell me your stories, feel me your feels, pedo-toilet your pedo-toileting. If you're serious about wanting to get back on track with normal male role modeling because you got burnt by neglect, because you got burnt by some pedo who couldn't control himself, then I will sit there with a fairly neutral expression and I'll let you do your emotionalizing at me. And a number of people did come up. Small, self-selected group. It was a beautiful day. All the Pride Parade people were out, 300,000 people. Had some good conversations. San Diego had moved its Pride from June to July because we sometimes get June gloom. We get a coastal overcasting in June and some rain. We put it to July to make sure it would be sunny, and indeed it was. The other side First side said, kids cannot consent to pedophilia. The other side is a meme, which I just made up very quick and dirty, and I've been throwing around on the internet to see if it sticks, is LGBTQ, capital Greek pi, lowercase Greek pi. I don't have to tell you what the pi stand for. It's the Greek letter for P. I don't have to explain the symbolism to you of a capital pi next to a lowercase pi. Let me show you that one. Evidently, for reasons best known to itself, OBS, or it might be the camera, or it might be YouTube, is reversing things left to right. So it's LGBTQ, capital P, capital pi, lowercase pi, and the whole thing crossed out. This one is a little tricky. On the one hand, every three hands now, but on the one hand, the first of three, LGBTQ, big pi, little pi, completes the mega acronym. I'm starting to get a little bit annoyed with my fellow conservatives who say LGBTQ and then what? And they get a little aposiopesis going on there where they just trail off. What do you think's coming next? Well, duh. You can't hold up the trans and isolate boys from male role models without a corresponding rise in connecting boys with legitimate male role models, because it's two sides of the same coin. So I'm operating in a Hegelian mode here, not that I know anything about philosophy, and I'm just going with it. Adding the pies completes the acronym, which is the thesis, the presence of boy love in the mega acronym, much to the disgust of Gays Against Groomers and other groups who don't want us around. On the second hand, it is crossed out. It is surature. Back when I was at UCSD, this was considered very stylish because it meant that you had read your Heidegger and meant that you had read your Derrida and knew all about Le Pharmacie de Platon and Plato's Phaedrus and all these other delicious topics. It's a little stale now, but it makes the point, so I'm willing to use it. The horizontal line crossing it out represents the negative response, the reaction against boy love. And you're seeing this with the Sound of Freedom, or as I like to call it, the Sound of Pedoschwing 2025. The Sound of Freedom is a movie that is designed to cater to the emotional needs of people who want to see child sex trafficking stomped on and destroyed. So the surature represents the reaction against boy love, but of course we're operating in a Hegelian context, so there is an expectation that somewhere between the zero boy love of the trans, the lesbian, feminist people, and the let's greenlight all kinds of sex between all kinds of people with no restrictions, what you might call the sex overly positive people, somewhere in there, somewhere in between, like the Laffer curve, for all you economists out there, somewhere in between, as with the Laffer curve, there's got to be a median point where you get a maximum of normal, functional male role modeling. You're not going to get that from the trans and lesbian feminists or the sex crazy people. You're not going to get that from the or on the other side from the sex crazy people. That's my span. So that was the discourse I wanted to engage people in is, tell me a story about how male role modeling went for you. Was it always perfect? Well, you were lucky. Or were there times when you were neglected? Or were there times when you were working with a male role model and he stole all your labor and he stole all your good ideas and he put his hands on you or whatever, and you want to tell stories about how bad that was and how you've been scared by male role models ever since? I know people have these stories because I've done 3 separate year-long post-gay programs, and these are the kind of stories that the guys have. I never was able to find a guy who was interested, or I was hooked up with this guy, but then all this horrible stuff happened between us, blah, 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 and I never was able to get over it. So that's why I do the stories that I do in Opus Generis, is to try to, chuckle people out of their hangups. Underneath, of course, I put a link to Facebook, my little page, San Diego HomerCon, which has a list of all my performances and links to the texts on Google Drops so you can download the texts and enjoy them. I talked to Angela, who was a Baptist lady. She came over to talk to me. She was very nice. I talked to Kevin, who's a Hare Krishna dude. We were able to recite some of the Bhagavad Gita together. That was good fun. I explained what I was doing and the need to transcend the animal impulses, which is very much a theme in the Bhagavad Gita literature. And so we had a good conversation and minor conversations with a number of other people. And a lot of college-age girls going, oh my God, what the fuck, on seeing my sign. So I'm kicking open the Overton window a little bit, and hopefully inspiring other folks to speak out in public. I don't want to see church and society blindsided on this issue. If you look at how the church responded to gay marriage, America has overgefallen and can't get up. If you look at how the church responded to the rise of trans, it looks like the church is pretty much on track to get solidly blindsided by the boy love issue, which, as I am tongue-in-cheek predicting, is going to kind of reach ahead in about 2025, which I'm calling Pedo-Showing 2025. So there was a lot of internal angst that I had to process. If you read through Dante's Purgatorio, the souls in purgatory voluntarily expose themselves to flame and the shame of telling their stories of the stupid things they did, the sinful things they did when they were alive. And I definitely felt a massive amount of that for myself, for the things I did when I was in college, which the less said about the better. You know, I had my nipples pierced. You know, we don't need to get into that. But also because I was at a Pride event. And of course, the flames were burning very bright. And of course, I conduct all that because I'm a poet. Okay, so that's enough of the billboarding. I'm hoping that other people will take up that as a challenge and be the kind of people who could go out there in public and have a conversation, rather than people who sit around on the internet and do whatever and then feel guilty and shamed about it and they never get anywhere. Ad read number 2. Memory Hole, a new service using extremely precise lasers and electric devices to obliterate unwanted and troublesome memories permanently by inducing surgical microlesions, holes in the brain, if you will. Who could forget Katharine Hepburn in Suddenly Last Summer, saying to the young doctor, "I'll only give you $15 million for your clinic if you cut that story out of her brain." Now, with Memory Hole, you can. Think what a lovely gift that would make for family members, especially around the holidays. Point number 3. A four-handed debate / conversation with a better, deeper Excellansic. Now, this is all taking place with no prejudice whatsoever to the actual woman who actually makes the videos under the name of Excellansic. She's a real person with a real life, and I have no desire to harass or engage in any kind of untoward conduct towards her. But I'm trying to popularize the idea of Zaphod Beeble-Trans. This is a very silly idea. It's a very cartoonish idea. But silly and cartoonish as it is, I thought with these girls who have the Joan of Arc voices or the boys who have the Be Like Mother thing going on, because it's so exciting to experiment with penetration or whatever, and they need to get the two heads talking to each other. So, I have to explain the participants in this four-handed debate before we can actually get the four-handed debate going here. Participants would be Mop Excellansic, this lovely creature here. It would be Dolled Up Excellansic, this creature here. Mark Robert Sorry, I dropped something and it killed the... Mop Excellansic, Dolled Up Excellansic, Mark Robert Didaskalos Minor. I emphasize the middle name for obvious reasons. Didaskalos is the personality that I use when I do Greek and Latin poetry or when I post at BoyChat. And Mark Joseph Minor, who is another character who is whose identity is foreclosed. So let's consider those in some detail. Mop Excellansic is the face that Sierra rejects. Excellansic All Dolled Up is the face that Sierra projects on social media, a tribute to the female performativity she learned from Judith Butler at Berkeley. An exolancic with some depth and integrity would have to include a reconciliation between Sierra, the woman sitting at home who creates and hopefully integrates the various personae, see Doris Lessing's Golden Notebook, Mop exolancic that she rejects, and dolled up exolancic, the elaborate Barbie doll image of constructed femininity, which would be recognized by Germaine Greer and Simone de Beauvoir as a necessarily artificial femininity. Feminine, but artificial. Artificial, but feminine. And we haven't even gotten started on Sierra's male side, that masculinity which is the great privilege and pleasure of the lesbian feminists to reject and externalize. So I guess that's coming out in the form of X deploying the Mark Joseph Minor image in the Mark Minor character field, which is a subfield of the Didaskalos character field, to meld Matthew Barney and abstract algebra. And so we should definitely include him, Mark Joseph Minor, as part of the puzzle as well. Except that I'll be doing most of the heavy lifting here in carrying that imago, the image of Mark Joseph Minor and his sex crimes, because in that respect, I'm stronger than exolancic. I have 20 years behind me of learning to speak in public about being a boy lover without triggering people to throw eggs at me. Mark Didaskalos Robert Minor, a thaumatropic poet, that is Mark Robert Minor presenting baby face and hairy face, and a lot of other faces as well, in quick rotation for public amusement, and no harm done to boys. In other words, the face of pedophilia that he wants to show with the idea that the public will find it amusing and not actionable. Gadgets would include the Eumolpus catastrophe in the Satyricon, which is Eumolpus pretending to be a card-carrying member of the Platonic high boy-lover priesthood, and then turning out, ha-ha, to be a common wolf. And you do that over and over again because every time you do it, it makes the groundlings laugh. Also, the three myths and the three speeches of Plato's Phaedrus, all addressing boy love from different perspectives, allowing him a performative exoskeleton, like Iron Man, inside of which to do his pedo antics safely. In addition, or rather in contrast, I should say, we have this character. We have this character here, who is Mark Joseph Minor, about the same age, guy from California, kind of a thick neck, but definitely not me. Mark Joseph Minor, a frozen, monopole, game over individual for whom there is no free play of persona between the innocent, playful, chaste, learned boy lover and the convicted sex offender, whose identity is locked into the abject, that's a shitty place to be, is locked into the abject positionality of being an appropriate target for pedo-toileting. Mark Joseph Minor will always figure as the latter in exolancic psychic economy. Whether she can assimilate Mark Didaskalos Robert Minor to that scheme remains to be seen. Because I set things up 30 years ago when I started doing Didaskalos, that Didaskalos never would get bogged down, neither I nor Didaskalos would ever get bogged down in accusations of sex crimes against boys. Because that's not the game I'm playing a literary game. This is the guy, Mark Joseph Minor, who actually went down the road of being a sex crime sort of a pedo. So this is the wire that Exolancic put her hand on Friday night in trying to confuse me and the confusing prestidigitation I do with poetic personae with this shmoo, Mark Joseph Minor, who has not got any play to him because he actually played with little boys. And that's you get put away for in jail and no one ever hears from you again. But that's not me. So, tackling now the debate, now that we have all four hands on deck, resolved. Transinteriority. Well, I didn't do it a resolve thing. I did a left-right thing. Do we need more transinteriority a la Zaphod Beeble trans? With the two heads, two different gendered heads. Or do we need less of it? Do we need to shut down the internal trans voices as as Exelancic recommends. First of all, what is transinteriority? I'm assuming people have read Jung and are familiar with the idea that boys have an anima, a source of female feelings normally repressed, and girls an animus, a source of male spiritual ideas normally repressed. I say it in a funny voice because the first generation of Jungian analysts, those trained by Jung, did so. Normally, she was a very cooperative woman, very nice to be around, but there were times when she was in the animus. They actually talk like that. I find it hilarious, and so I've adopted that. If you're not familiar with Jung's ideas, a good first approximation to a definition can be given by asking, what else can I do with my gender dysphoria besides going straight to gender surgery? Which approach could be called transexteriority, trying to solve internal problems by external modifications. Point of irony. The more the Mop Exelancic head makes the case for shutting down transinteriority, the more the Mop Exelancic head makes the case for transinteriority, because the Exelancic Mop head is the second head that makes the Zaphod Bibeltrans discourse, that makes possible the Zaphod Bibeltrans discourse I am currently engaged in. The Mop Exelancic head, which I have right here, is participating in my discussion of transinteriority, whether she likes it or not, just like the Mark Joseph Minor head, this guy. Trying to do a little pedo smirk there. I had a really good build going too. Just like the Mark Joseph Minor head, which Exelancic has not got, has been dragged into participating in Exelancic's discussion of transinteriority, whether I like it or not. So, if Exelancic has some beef with me because I made a mop head cartoon, I took her cartoon and made a mop head out of it and put voices in her mouth, well, let her bear in mind that she is telling her followers to Google Mark Minor pedo, and this is the guy that comes up when you Google Mark Minor pedo. The difference is that I embrace my transinteriority, my cross-gender side, and my hairy face, evil pedo shadow side. There he is. Which means I can make a puppet show out of it and entertain people. But Exelancic doesn't care to do anything of the kind. Coming now to the actual debate. I hate long debates, so we'll keep it very short, following Silver Spoon's wise recommendation. Points against transinteriority. Number one, it's weird. It's never really been part of American culture to know what's going on in your soul. In the old days, the church dealt with all that in its traditional ways according to its rigid categories: guilt, consciousness of sin, redemption, salvation, blah, blah, blah. Now, no one deals with transinteriority. You just get handed over to the gender surgeons, and he's the last man to know anything about the soul. Number two, for why we should reject transinteriority. Number two, Exelancic doesn't believe in it because there's no materialistic phenomenology for it. And Exelancic's whole brand is that she's the one who knows all the medical research. Fair play. Somebody should be keeping up with the medical research and bringing it into the forum as we debate whether trans surgery should be the go-to treatment for kids presenting with trans issues. But medical research isn't going to help people troubled with soul and spirit. Number three, why we should reject transinteriority. Psychic dangers. Having worked at the YMCA, I like to wave around a rubric of safe, sane, supervised, and temporary for people playing with the other parts of their personality. For instance, if kids want to play around at being animals, you don't want them to go 724 furry, demand to buy and wear a fursuit, and claim the right to poop in a litter box during math class. There is the danger of the person's sanity being compromised by girls listening to their spirit voices and boys listening to their soul voices. Jung covers this in great detail. I'm going to do a little French here. Jung covers this in great detail, referring to the abaissement du niveau mental among people, the abasement of the mental level, abaissement du niveau mental, among people who can't pull free of psychic fascinations. Listening to the spirit-soul voices often leads to the person taking their place on the stage of history, case in point, Joan of Arc. And that's not something to be done prematurely. Kids have to learn to keep their trans-interiority kid-sized, even when the voices talk big. And Jung talks about this a lot. The voices tend to be grandiose. Number 4, ascribing your trans-interiority to outside influences and not taking responsibility for your trans-interiority as something of your own is great fun. This would be like the lesbian feminists getting together to dump on the great father violence and rapiness of men, which is something that they see everywhere around them in the world, and not taking responsibility for their own masculine animus moments. Or, contrariwise, men's groups that spend all their time on external phenomenology of powerful, controlling, sexy women. I'm not particularly impressed with that either. There's two notorious groups out there. One of them was a merger between Man Boobs and what was it? Man Boobs and We Hunted the Mammoth. So I refer to it affectionately as Mammoth Boobs. And the other one, A Voice for Men, which I like to refer to as Bad Advice for Men. Now, other side of the debate, points for trans-interiority arguing for it now. Number 1, it's cheap. The Opus Generis booklet, which will frog march you through all manner of trans-interiority, costs about $25 to print out, where Gender Surgery costs $250,000, $250,000. Number 2, trans-interiority is fun. Basically, it's just doing a creative puppet show of your internal dialogue, of your internal gender dialogue. Number 3, it's painless. And here, I think, is where Exolansic would have to concede me this point, because this is what all of her videos are about. Trans-interiority is painless because there's no complications, no bleeding, no toileting disasters, no fistulas, no dog ears, no dilation, no sepsis and death. And no more affording body horror content to Exolansic. Number 4, it's unavoidable. The cross-gender psychic experiences are still there after the surgery, when you wake up. So you might as well learn to deal with them before the surgery. Number 5, common. The phenomenology for trans-interiority, under the heading gender dysphoria, is pretty robust, if not subject to materialistic investigation. Seems like pretty much all sufferers from gender dysphoria, by definition, are in touch with what their repressed alter or altera would like to say, or would like to do if only society would let him or her. So why not go ahead and say it and do it using hand puppets, which is fun? Number 6, trans-interiority is bad if unstructured, but it's easy to structure. In fact, that's pretty much what literature is about. We have plenty of myths, Ovid's Metamorphoses or Shakespeare, for every pattern of libido flow that a young person might be confused by. Okay, winding down, I think that's the end of the debate. I just want to hit these terms really quickly. Zaphod Bibeltrans, because it's such a weird-sounding term, is a robust dialectical expression of trans-interiority. You must pay the rent. I can't pay the rent. You must pay the rent. I can't. Okay, that's what I mean by Zaphod Bibeltrans, is me having a female altera with whom I can have a dialogue. In my case, it's mostly going to be the muse. Oh, sing in me, muse. Man in the the whole Iliad thing. But of course, it's all the goddesses. It's the green mother of Yahe, which I, as a plant grower, I have a deep response to that. It's Cybele, right? It's the desire to be the evil mother who's like a cone snail. She stings and she paralyzes and she devours the little fish. That's the Cybele energy, which I'm expressing in an animal sort of way. There's Demeter who stays home and gives nurture and sustenance to her daughter. I love playing all these goddess characters because I have that much goddess energy. Ordinarily I don't, externalize that with a mop. Ordinarily I externalize that by doing classical storytelling. But as I say, I'm reduced to communicating with folks on the net, and this is what I have on the net, is a caricature of Exolansic with a mop behind it. The opposite of Zaphod Bibeltrans, and this is equally grotesque and silly, so just enjoy it, is binary Procrustes. Binary Procrustes demands that there be one gender and no transinteriority. So, if it's a girl, born a girl, and starts to have the transmasculine voices, the Joan of Arc voices, then you got to get in there with a corkscrew, tie the girl to a rock or something, and have a winch going and turn the winch until you can pull a chunk of flesh out of the girl and call that a penis and call the girl a boy. That's how Binary Procrustes approaches the women. Contrariwise, for the boys who have trans thoughts about anal penetration and dildoing and I want to be like mother and I want to have breasts like mother, the boys who are having those trans effeminate thoughts, their feet are sticking over the edge of the bed, if you know what I mean. And we all know how Procrustes dealt with feet sticking over the edge of the bed. Procrustes chops your feet off if your feet hang over the edge of the bed. And that's what's going to happen to the boys who sign up with Binary Procrustes. Final slap at Exolancic. And I'm sure she'll come back at me, and if she didn't, I would worry that she wasn't feeling well. For all her protestations, I'm not entirely sure that she is really as much against body horror and against castration as she claims. Popularizing castration television, as her repeated coverage of the I Am Jazz Genderscape does, has a way of fitting in all too neatly with perennial, if crude, lesbian feminist fantasies of normalizing the idea of castrating all men, such as seem to be of interest to former Voice of Reason interviewee Kara Dansky. I observe a certain sensuality of nipple fiddling in her content, a certain sensuality of castration in the way her content is focused exclusively on body horror. Opus Generis, which is, in good medicine show fashion, the patent remedy that I am selling, Opus Generis is clearly meant to show people a way out of the ongoing nightmare of body horror, a way out of being obsessed with mother's body and being penetrated like a woman in castration, a way out of the economy of men obsessed with sexy boys and boys obsessed with sexy men. Exolancic's body horror content on YouTube is a body horror film that never ends. As such, it fails the Leadcheb test, which is the Alison Bechdel test spelled backwards. It fails the Leadcheb test in that it's nothing but women talking to other women about women's stuff, which is all very good, but it's not going to help people who are caught up. There needs to be an interruption of that pattern, and that's where the salient male comes in. Whether a Christian salient male dad in American middle-class fashion who plays ball with the boy, or a Zeus who physically grabs the boy and drags him back from California, which is where little Jeff Younger is right now. Moving on. Number 4, 7 Ages of BL Activism, celebrating the various ages of Lila May. Okay, he's supposed to be Lyle, but I'm calling him Lila May just to be obnoxious. Lila is an anagram of Lyle, L-I-A-L, and I put it to be Lila May because I don't know. From east of the Rockies, that's all I'm going to say. I don't know. Other side of the world. I did grad school in Athens. Athens about as big as a dime. And I don't know if I should tell this. I was in the studio when the B-52s were recording Funplex, and they took my sound manager with them to Paris for the final editing. And this is what my sound manager told me. He said, well, Fred told me, why don't you come up to my room? I'm bad. And the sound manager and I laughed our asses off because no one escapes from Athens without some funny stories about the B-52s. Okay, moving on. 7 Ages of BL Activism. We got a young person who talked too much. Now he's too much into secrecy. These are legitimate stages. I want to recognize them as legitimate stages. We have Tom O'Carroll. I pulled Tom Carroll's leg. That doesn't mean I don't love him. Tom O'Carroll is an aging gentleman from the north of England who has a massive track record in terms of BL activism all through the 70s, 80s, 90s, all the decades. And who is being very graceful about turning over the mantle, the ratty sweater, as it were, to the next generation. And those are things I think we should celebrate. So I did a little parody of Shakespeare. We've seen plenty of infant activists here mewling and puking about their BL feelings. And this is what Lila May's early blabberings at Free Speech Tube amounted to. We've seen the schoolboy activist learning about activism in the past and discussing secret societies and secret handshakes and the importance of dark web computer networks and pedophile islands. This is what Lila May's post at Heretic Talk, Tom O'Carroll, Heretic Talk, amounts to. It is pleasant to rhyme this 21st century interest in secret societies with George Cecil Ives and the Order of Chironea. This was a friend of Oscar Wilde who was very much into the same sort of thing. George Cecil Ives and the Order of Chironea, he founded in 1897. We've seen way too many of the lover boy activists making woeful ballads to a cute boy's eyebrows and various other body parts in long, drawn-out objectification threads and screaming bloody murder about, but boys are hot, and but sex is fun, as if that were all there were to boy love. Jesse, our immortal and immoral sexy fawn, may never get beyond this priapic stage. We've seen the act-up soldier activist out there marching with his placard, ever so pleased to be arrested for the cause, full of a lively sense of his own importance, and wonderfully excited to see his picture in a newspaper. Can't wait for Lila May to grow a pair, go to his first Pro-BL protest, spend a night in jail, and write poetry about it. I put in my time in this kind of thing. I was a gay activist in the 80s. We had led the UCSD kids in a march to Sacramento for gay marriage. Never thought it was going to happen. It did, but by that time I had already kind of left gay activism behind. We've seen the judgmental activist making pronouncements from his position of age and experience. Well, this is how we did things 20 or 30 years ago. Of course, most of those folks are dead now. You know who you are, boy chat. We've seen the lean and slippered pantaloon activist, now retired, a little paunchy and ridiculous, continuing to make pronouncements, though vaguely aware that he's preaching to no one but himself and the 7 people who read his heretical blog. You know who you are, boy chat. And we've seen the senile BL activists who sit quietly in the corner by the fire murmuring, boys, 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 to themselves until they fall asleep. Tom Carroll knows all of these stages better than I do and is doing the most graceful job ever of slipping between them himself and encouraging others to do the same. Well done, sir. Thank you, Tom. Ad read 3. Is your child resistant, sulky, combative about the gender change operation you've self-prescribed for him? I mean her. Does she persist in thinking that the mere possession of a small penis and testicles gives some sort of a claim to a masculine identity? Have you been putting off that genderless reveal party you invited your friends to for too long? If so, don't hesitate, but get in touch with Dr. Blair Peters of Oregon State Health and Sciences University for their wee willy winky whiteout service. One moment your hostile child is sucking on an anesthetic-laced lollipop. The next, they're waking up to that stylish, smooth-crotched look and feel. And you'll never face those testosterone-based problem behaviors again. Folks, Dr. Peters' up-to-date, well-funded, and completely automated robo-castration clinic is handling 4 to 5 of these complication-removing surgeries per day. Your child's troublesome genitals will never be touched by human hands. Guaranteed. At least until the janitor empties the slops bucket into the dumpster behind the building at the end of the day. Call now for your appointment. Special offer for proud parents. Have your child's severed genitals bronzed as a forever memento of the gender hassles they chose to leave behind. Urban Dictionary work. I love making definitions for Urban Dictionary because I'm a lexicographer and I have to do something fun. Lexicography is actually the kind of high-end philology that I do is extremely boring. Penotoileting. 3 examples. GenSpec, that is to say Sasha and Stella, who have a fabulous organization, a fabulous podcast called A Wider Lens. In number 120, they interviewed Dr. James Cantor. There was a very interesting back and forth where he perceived them to be riffing on their own emotions, where he wanted to talk about the science, and he cut them off. He cut them off. There was a lot of discussion in the YouTube comments about whether that was appropriate or not. Stella and Sasha supported Cantor, and there was some actual processing going on of, okay, what happens in me when I start to have this pedotoileting discourse? So we'll cover that later. Number 2, Dr. Borisenko. This is the one I used for Urban Dictionary. Dr. Borisenko, Karlin Borisenko. And is there no button I can push on YouTube to never hear about that woman again? Why not? Dr. Karlin Borisenko passing around a fake quote to tar Matt Walsh as being pro-pedo. That's just straight up pedo toileting. Just a made-up quote, and she wanted to dump on Matt Walsh, and she did so. Number 3. This is the one I already covered in painful detail. Exolancic asking her followers to Google Mark Minor pedo and post about it on Discord. So, again, not really set up for that. So, this is the definition I wrote for Urban Dictionary. Pedo toileting. No one wants to be held accountable for difficult, uncomfortable, acceptable pedophile feelings. So it's only natural for people to look around for a known pedophile, the kind of person whose personality has been so broken down by social shame and public stigma that everyone feels comfortable crapping on them. A public convenience. And then to go over to them and crap out their own pedophilia and focalize it as though being experienced by the known pedophile. The trouble is, the pedotoileter gains no insight into their own projected psychodynamics, and the person dumped on becomes subject to the stigma of dozens of others in addition to carrying his own burdens. For your inspection, Dr. Karlin Borisenko, 6/18/23 tweet, a representation of conservative Matt Walsh, a commentator she has long been at war with, making certain comments. Gave the number of the tweet. Which is more likely, that Matt Walsh, of all people, actually said, we all have sexual or violent urges towards children, or that Dr. Borisenko has slipped into the pedotoileting zone. Eromatophilia. I submitted this 7/12, don't know if it's up yet. Latin in plus rumis, breast, means to force the breast into an infant's mouth. This word gave Catullus a raunchy insult. In his poetry, the word refers to an older, more powerful man forcing a younger man to fillet his penis. In early 2023, the male trans community began sharing publicly about the unnamed fetish for having an infant suck male nipples in a trans fantasy imitation of normal, motherly breastfeeding. It seemed reasonable to dub this new fetish eromatophilia. The infant derives nothing from this action. It is meaningful only within the trans fetish psychic economy. If any white gunk does come out of the inappropriately hormone-marinated male bodies, it can't be called breast milk and can't be good for the kid. Example, Riley Gaines, who was bumped out of her gold medal in swimming by trans-presenting swimmer, male, Leah Thomas, claims that a picture showing Mika Minio Paluello and his Madonna wannabe with Mika Minio Paluello, who identifies as a woman but isn't, breastfeeding a baby, was, quote, normalizing pedophilia. Well, not exactly. Political cartoonist Tatsuya Ishida is doing a viciously satirical series on chest feeding, July 2023, doubtless inspired by Mika Minio Paluello and his Madonna wannabe with real child iconographic antics. But let's be real. Trans eromatophilia is really coming out into the open now and should have its own proper term. The psychopathology of men who haven't separated from the mother image is very real. Ben Shapiro, responding to the trans couple, male, trying to breastfeed a kid from 9 months with Courtney Cox, is a prime example of eromatophiliophobia. Ben didn't like it at all. See the clip, transgender parent tries to breastfeed child in bizarre viral video. So that's my take on eromatophilia. I mentioned in passing that autogynephilia has an anagram, hang up, I oil a toy, an anagrammatic representation of my tongue-in-cheek contention that much of what is driving trans activism is teenage boys experimenting with anal masturbation, dildoing, penetration, feminization fantasies, and the fail male, power girl, fail male, power girl feelings that go along with those fantasies. So autogynephilia, hang up, I oil a toy. I'm going to list very quickly another dozen terms I have not submitted yet. I'm very behind on this because this, time marches on. We need to get these terms recognized by Urban Dictionary. Kids cannot consent to pedophilia. Sort of making that a slogan. I put that on the billboard. We've already talked about it. LGBTQ, capital Pi, lowercase pi. We talked about that. That's the other side of my billboard. Nyrant, which is an anagram of tranny, T-R-A-N-N-Y versus N-Y-R-A-N-T. Convenient to use when tranny hubris is confronted with tranny nemesis. One can then say, sic semper tyrannis, which is a riff on sic semper tyrannis, or thus always to tyrants, which is what Booth said after assassinating President Lincoln. To be used sparingly, only the worst examples of TRA aggressiveness, trans rights activist aggressiveness and rudeness qualify as nirants. Shoup scale. Always interesting to try to pinpoint the extent to which someone is mother goddess possessed. Because I perform Catullus 63, Cybele and Attis, in which I have to go from being a normal Roman male to being completely possessed by fear of Cybele, the ecstasy of that and the fear of that, and then pulling back and giving voice to the character Catullus, who loved being heterosexual, and he's the last guy to cut his balls off, and he gives the apotropaic formula, go away, Cybele, do not drive us insane. The Shoup scale goes from 1 to 10. I'm very interested when people hit this maximum level to where their personality as a man, man-looking man, gets completely drowned in the undertow coming up from the unconscious. So there's certainly minutes in the video interview of James Shoup by Benjamin Boyce, in which James Shoup is clearly 100% possessed by his mother Imago and wouldn't hurt a fly. That's what Norman Bates said at the end of Psycho, when he is completely and permanently possessed by his mother's image. That's what makes him Psycho. Phil Illy, on the other hand, is up and down the Shoup scale like a flute solo, up and down, and this can be tracked in real time through the course of the interview. And I thought I was going to have live chat replay and people would be able to go that and see that, but live chat replay, Mr. Boyce, has been not activated for that video, and so that's not accessible. I hope we can get Mr. Boyce to fix that. Please, Mr. Boyce. Other people hitting a Shoup 10, Jeffrey Marsh, Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, and of course, most famously, Norman Bates in Psycho. Tranobites. This is scary. Tranobites was rejected by Urban Dictionary on first submittal. I'm going to have to submit it a couple more times because I think it's relevant. I think it hits the nail on the head. The Cenobites. Now, unfortunately, we have to talk about the Greek. Koinos is Greek for common. Hokoinos bios, the common life. We have epicene, which is sexual characteristics that belong to both, because koinos means common. Epicene means, I can't tell whether it's male or female, like a Noel Coward character in Noel Coward play. Hokoinos bios, the common life, was lived by the monks in the early days of monasticism out there in the Egyptian desert, and they became known as Cenobites in the English pronunciation because of Hokoinos bios. They lived Hokoinos bios, the common life. They're not represented as monks. They are represented as Dantescan sufferers of contrapasso in Clive Barker's Hellraiser from 1987. The Cenobites in Clive Barker's 1987 Hellraiser have had their bodies reshaped to reflect the distortions of God's image in them, which they practiced during their earthly life. In common speech, they look like their sins. So the woman who spent too much time and money training her voice and misinfluencing other people with her voice on radio has her voice box torn open and held suspended by wires as in the shock mount of an old-fashioned microphone, like this, except with a shock mount. The guy who ate too much became a fat butterball Cenobite, the personification of gluttony, and Plato talks about this at the beginning of the Phaedrus. Gluttony can also be seen represented in the paintings of the Seven Deadly Sins by Paul Cadmus, which are some of my favorite paintings. The Tranobites are representations of people who disfigured the gendered image of the bodies God placed them in a way that went beyond mere childish dress-up play to the violation of deeper ontological realities, and as a result they must now manifest in Dantescan contrapasso their self-inflicted spiritual mutilations forever. They are given the demonic role of drawing others into the cult as well, so that they go from being people just playing with cross-gender imagery to people who compromise themselves into an eternal doom of Tranobite hell. The doctors practicing this also will find that they have become grotesquely distorted representations of themselves in hell as cruel sexual mutilators. Chicken crying, that's a very simple thing. There was a woman in the Matt Walsh What is a Woman video who said, in response to Matt Walsh's very normal questioning, does a chicken cry, as if fake emotions could be leveraged to prove trans points? Sorry. Hashtag We're Coming for Your Children. That was actually shouted at the New York City Pride this year. Zaphod Bibeltrans, we've covered. Binary Procrustes, we've covered. Fiji Mermaid. This is a satirical representation of anyone who thinks of the human body as simply sewn together meat bits as a flesh golem. This is Exlan's exposition, which I reject. The Lead-Cheb test. Ask yourself, and the other guys in the theater, is this movie going to be about anything but women talking about women things? A simple but effective riff on the Bechdel test. Teacherhausen by proxy. There was a woman who was had a 10-year-old in her class, and she was giving him a private email and offering to let the kid stay at her house. This is boundary crossing. No, don't go there, teachers. Otherwise, I have to invent this term called Teacherhausen by proxy, which is a step forward beyond Trannyhausen by proxy, which is where the parent has gender issues, and instead of dealing with them themselves, takes the gender issues out on the body of the child. Okay, I'm running out of time. I gotta wind this up by 7:20, so I got 15 minutes left. We're gonna have to speed run through the rest of it, which is a mercy to you and to me. GenSpect 120, go ahead and watch it. It's got Dr. Cantor. Cantor, back in 2018, did his famous include the P tweet. No one took him up on this, and no one shot him. No one ran him out of town. This happened to Dr. Hubbard in 2019. Sasha and Stella gave him the pushback he'd been asking for since 2018. The interesting thing here is to watch the pedotoileting coming bubbling up out of Sasha and Stella and watch how Cantor handled it. That's very interesting and very apposite, very appropriate for anyone talking about boy love in the public from here on out. I had pasted the commentary back and forth from the comments under the video, but you can read that yourself. Ad read number 4. Hey, got a social event coming up and feel like you might run out of insults, cutting remarks, and general misanthropic abuse? Need to recharge the old hate batteries? Stop by your friendly online one-stop hate peddlers at hatespeechcheap.org. That's hatespeechcheap.org, no spaces. Because we operate in volume, we can supply you with cheap shots by the 50-pound bag. Order today. Heavens, our hate is tasty and excrementitious. That's a Garrison Keillor joke. Number 7, Phil Illy interview. No Zaphod Bibeltrans needed for this guy. He is his own Zaphod Bibeltrans. You can literally see him doing this and going back and forth between the female voice and the male voice in real time. Different tilt of the head, different tonality, different subject matter. And then Boyce will cue him for the one, Boyce will cue him for the other, and he'll do this. Absolutely fascinating, brilliant interview. Boyce's interview with Shoup, absolutely brilliant. Boyce's interview, his second interview with Phil Illy, absolutely brilliant. Boyce is the man to watch. Number 8, the 4-language Phaedrus. I am fatigued, so we'll get a very quick rundown of the first couple lines of the Phaedrus, which I've finished my 4-language edition. I'm now starting to record it. The Greek and Latin I have some functionality with. The English I've been speaking 57 years now. The Japanese, frankly, it's a cry for help. Anyone who has a voice actor friend in Japan, let him know. As I say, the Johnny's debacle, all the young men talking about their abuse at the hands of Johnny Kitagawa, that might be a little bit of an opening for this kind of thing to be discussed in Japan. Hope so. O Socrates, o Pilepaidre, poide kai poten. Paraleusiu o Socrates, tu que palu, poreuomade prosperipaton exo tecus. Sic non grece dietripse chronon, catemenos ex heotinu. Tau de soi kai amoi hetairoi pe tomenos acumenoi. Catatas hodus poiumai tus peripatus. Pe sigar acopoterus einae ton entois dromois. Latin. O amici Phaedre, quuma et unde? Adusia o Socrates, cephali filio, pergo alten deambulandi gratia extra urbam. Plurum in tempus quae sedens a matutino ad hancusque ora illi constitui. A tuo altem meo sodale acumeno persuasus, deambulando exerceor. Quod curam exercitationis genus facilius, salubriusque, ille quamcurrendi certamen existimat. That was Latin. My dear Phaedrus, where to and where from? From Lysias, the son of Cephalus, and I am going to take a walk outside the wall, for I have been sitting with him the whole morning, and in accordance with your friend and mine, Acumenus, I will take my walk in the broad streets. He says such walks are much more refreshing than in the narrow lanes of the town. And it just goes on like that. It's terrible. Nihongo. Socrates. いや、パイドロソ。どこへそしてどこから来たのかねパイドロソ。キャフロスの息子のルシアスのところから来ました、ソクラテス。そして、それから城壁の外へ散歩に行くところです。何しろ、ルシアスのところで朝早くから腰を落ち着けて、countless hours to pronounce 腰を落ち着けて、腰を落ち着けて。Harry pocketed it. Harry pocketed it. I can do that one like a maniac. ずいぶん長く時を過ごしてしまったものですから。私は散歩といえば、あなたにも私にも仲間の悪魔の巣の弦に従って、大道を割歩することにしています。つまり、彼の説によると、疲れを癒すにはその方が、泥モスを歩くよりも効果があるそうですからね。Give me help. I'm at the end of my philological resources trying to do Greek, Latin, English, and finally Japanese. All right. Thank you very much for listening to this Virtue Cast number 5. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it set a few points straight. The idea that people can't talk about boy love in public is now like a 20th century thing. I don't want to hear about that anymore. It's the 21st century. We're all moving forward with hopefully the blessing of Tom Carroll on our shoulders, as well as the future promise of bright young things like our own Lila May, if he can ever hopefully reclaim his masculine identity. By all means, give me grief at Boy Chat. I'm used to it. I've been there 30 years. It doesn't bother me. Exolanzic, I'm not here to make fun of you. I'm here to, as an ally, we're both fighting against people doing these horrible things to their bodies, and I hope we can, bring a few people to their senses before they commit these horrible acts. And don't pay any attention to my stupid puppet show. I'm a kind of person who does stupid puppet shows. Please don't take it personally. I'm just trying to explain how much better it would be if people took their gender voices seriously rather than just trying to do the surgeries, which is not a good idea. All right, I have no idea when the next one, Virtue Cast number 6, will be up. It's a function of when I accumulate enough material and when I get angry enough about something to make it. Thanks very much. I hope that this does work and I can actually get this uploaded, and we will now shut down the whole system and see if any of this was uploaded to YouTube so that people at Boy Chat can enjoy it, and maybe even at Twitter as well. Thanks so much and have a great summer. This is Mark Robert Didaskalos Minor signing off for Virtue Cast number 5. Good night.